So thank you, Leo, for launching these again this year. I think that they were pretty successful last year, and thank you all for being here, and particularly thank you to Petro and to Joshua for helping us do this first session. In some ways, it's a continuation, as I'm looking at Joe Bishop, of something that we did at the Court Hotel, that Scope and led by Linda Darling-Hammond, did with many, many people in the room I think in the middle of June last year, about what could be elements of a new accountability system. And so this is another kind of cut at that in terms of what we need to actually do to move forward. So I want to just frame my remarks with a sense of urgency, which is that it doesn't matter what school system you walk into right now, but there is a reason why Arnie Duncan, in the last couple of weeks, has said that testing is sucking up the oxygen from schools. That it's now, even in Washington, D.C., people are starting to say that there has been over-testing. Even the Washington, D.C. school system has put a moratorium on high-stakes consequences of testing. And you go from school system to school system, district to district around the country, and you see that there are people, the latest being Alberto Cavallo, the superintendent from Miami-Dade, saying, enough of this already, we need to rebalance this. Now, let me actually just say that the profile on courage here was the guy to my left who actually said it first. I think I said it more vocally because I have a bigger mouth than he does. He's much more thoughtful about these things. I tend to do these things with a baseball bat sometimes. But we have, but Josh Starr in Montgomery County said, if you really want Common Core to work, you have to stop testing for 3 years, or stop this kind of testing for 3 years, and he talked about why. And I then said a few months later that we need a moratorium on high-stakes testing if you want Common Core to work. And now, fast forward to a year later or so, a year and a half later, the Gates Foundation said, if you want Common Core to work, you have to have a moratorium on high-stakes testing for 2 years. Now, I start here because we could all in this room go through example after example of why the current accountability system is broken. And I can actually explain what the current accountability system is, but I'd rather not. I'd rather talk about what we need to do instead. But, whether it's the stories of, kids having such agita and throwing up on their testing booklets, or even a story that just came out this week from Pittsburgh. Somebody just told me last Tuesday in Pittsburgh, they actually made big cuts in testing. The biggest reductions were planned for grades 3, 4, and 5, where the number of periods spent in testing will decline from 85.5 periods to 41.5 periods. And you wonder, as well as many of us, that when the entire month of April now is dedicated towards testing in many public schools throughout the country, and then May and June become, well, the test is over, so what are we doing for the rest of the year? Think about what that means in terms of student time, contact time, instructional time, on and on and on. So I would just start with, I think that there is now not a consensus, but there is more of a recognition that the accountability system, whether it came from No Child Left Behind or Race to the Top or state accountability systems, that basically say test every student every year and create the high-stakes consequences for student promotion, for teacher evaluation, and for schools staying open or closed, that there's something wrong with that system. Now, having said that, the rest of my remarks are, okay, how do we fix it? Because the moment we used to say this, people would say, okay, you're against accountability. What about the urgency of making sure that kids are actually ready for college and career? And so instead of saying, no, I didn't stop beating my wife yesterday and trying to answer those questions, let's actually start talking about what we do to fix it. And that's what I want to spend a few minutes on, and then I'm going to stop. So I started with what we did with Linda Darling Hammond and Scope and the 10 points in terms of the new accountability social compact, because within that, there is an idea about how to fix it. And it actually comes down to 3 pillars. Think about what we want to do for kids. These days, what we're trying to do is help kids become critical thinkers and problem solvers. Isn't that the reason why everybody says the Common Core is important? You know, move away from rote memorization, become critical thinkers and problem solvers. What Josh would tell you in terms of their accountability system is, that's not sufficient. The other thing we have to do is we have to actually talk about kids' social, emotional lives. And that starts, in my judgment, with helping kids build relationships, creating trust with themselves and with adults. And it also means that we have to help kids develop the skills of persistence and grit. Now, there's a whole lot of other things that we need to do, including having the joy of teaching and learning back in schools and making sure that kids walk into school wanting to be there instead of wanting to be everywhere but there, and wanting to make sure that every school where parents want to send their kids, educators want to be, and kids are engaged. So if you think like I do that schooling is about helping kids build relationships, creating trust, helping critically think, apply knowledge these days, not just knowing things, and then helping build resistance and grit and persistence, character, then we have to have an accountability system around that for all kids, not just around what's the data so that the muckety-bucks could basically make those lower down than the muckety-mucks accountable for what the muckety-mucks were supposed to be accountable for. So as a result, data is of course important, but how do you have the data that works to improve education, to create those things for all kids? So this is the 3 things that we thought. Number 1, you create a system. We all think teachers are really, really important. Create a professional capacity building system for teachers and for principals that is about not test and punish, but about support and improve. How do we make sure that teachers, not only that we attract and retain teachers to do the work that we're asking them to do, but how do we support them in that endeavor? And there's lots of different ways of doing that. But bucket 1 of 3 buckets is really being intentional about professional growth and capacity building and thinking about it in terms of an improvement model, a support and improvement model, not a test and punish model. Of course, data is important that way. Of course, you also get to the point that if somebody can't teach, they shouldn't be there, and you have evaluation systems, but starting by embedding improvement, collaboration, things like that. Number 2, how do we do all the things that we need to do for kids? It's going to take money. And what we've seen in the United States of America is that some wealthier districts still spend a lot of money on schools. In my view, probably it's never enough. But if you actually look under the data, poor districts don't spend a lot of money on kids. And we do actually still have a divide between rich and poor. And the income gap and the achievement gap based upon income is twice the achievement gap based upon race. And we really need to deal with the fact that we can't keep on saying to teachers, just do more with less. There's not anything in the till left in places like Detroit and Philadelphia and places like that. And I can go on and on with. So what do we do about that? There has to be some resource accountability. And some of the equity cases that, some of our friends like Michael Rebell and David Scaria have filed were about trying to figure out how you get that resource accountability. But that has to be baked into state laws and into districts and into the federal law. And in some ways, that's what ESEA was supposed to be about in the first place. So the second bucket is resource accountability and making sure there's a shared responsibility for it. Not simply to say to teachers in classrooms, just do it, and not have what we need to do to get our job done. And there's a whole bunch of resources, whether you're talking about making sure that you have music and art, making sure you have time for teachers to actually talk to each other, to do the professional development so that they can retool their instruction. I mean, we can go on and on and on about what those resources are, but that's the second bucket. And the third bucket is probably the most important, which is why did we fixate on testing in the beginning, in the first place? Because even though there are places like the Performance Consortium schools in New York City, which have fantastic multiple measures and meaningful measures of student improvement, we never understood that you could actually count that, see that, figure out how to build an accountability system around that. Because it wasn't just one test score, which could go into an algorithm. So the third and most important bucket for a new accountability system is what is the dashboard of multiple measures of meaningful student work? Because data is important, looking at student work is important, but there are a lot of different measures that may include standardized test scores in terms of that are aligned to what we want kids to know and be able to do in the 21st century, including building relationships, critical thinking, developing resilience, and being prepared for college and career. So that's what we have thought about in terms of kind of like the three buckets of what could constitute a new accountability system that replaces No Child Left Behind and that replaces Race to the Top. Now, in that, I'm going to be really careful to say, of course you can retain the disaggregation of student data by race and ethnicity, gender, economic status, language status, and special needs status. Of course we can figure out how to do those kinds of things. And we have to, because we have to always kind of see where we are and where we need to do. But there's lots of different ways of getting there. We cannot keep reducing kids to an English and mathematics test score and reducing teachers to that as well. We can't reduce communities to their schools get closed or kept open based upon those two pieces of data. So that's what we would propose with a lot of community involvement. There's a lot of places that are doing pieces of this. California is, Vermont is, Montgomery County is, and I would close by basically saying, let's think about, when I started about urgency, let's think about, even though we don't expect Congress to do anything right now in this polarized environment, maybe it will be better after November. Most of us don't think so, but maybe it will. We can always hope. But let us start moving an agenda 50 years after ESEA with this new accountability, with infusing ESEA with the equity that it was supposed to have in the first place, that Johnson and others envisioned. Let's use the 50th anniversary of the Elementary and Secondary School Act as the organizing principle or gold star or North Star or whatever we want to say to actually move this agenda. Thank you very much.
Thank you.